certain group of people.
Okay, we're on it. I believe you left off on Yudam and Aleph.
Yes.
Okay.
Somewhere.
Okay.
A little break.
Need the exactly you are.
So we have that.
Probably by Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda. I'll have to guess you left off there. Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda. First one line is Rav Chisda. It's Chisda. About a quarter of the way down the page. Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda, Am Travayo.
8B or
10A. 10A.
Say what?
10A.
10A.
Okay. I can hear you, Jules. I'm not deaf. You don't have to shout.
Well, you didn't you didn't hear me the first time. All right.
10A?
10A. Yeah. I'm going to presume the first word of the line is Chisda.
Oh, it's a big page, Rabbi.
About a quarter of the way down. Yep.
Okay.
So if Nachman Rav Chisda Amri case, let's just review where you were yesterday and go get up to speed. Okay, so we had a machlokes, but had like bia metzia lechaveri, kana chaveri, or loy kana chaveri, and this is really what we'll be talking about now. Can you pick up a lost object on behalf of your friends? So generally speaking, the principle would be zachin. The principle would be that if it wasn't a lost object, if it was a ownerless object, you would be able to do it. But maybe a lost object is different, and we'll explain why in a moment. If you yourself are acquiring a portion of it, then you could also acquire on behalf of your friend. That's called migud zachin nafshi zachin am l'chavri. Because you're acquiring it for yourself, you can acquire it for your friend. That's true if you're taking a portion of it. So let's say you want to take half, your friend takes half, that makes sense. However, if you're not taking anything, you want to pick it up on your friend's behalf. We said that was a debate between scholars, there's a machlokes here between the Rabbanon and Rabbanon and Rabbi Eliezer, and it's also debate how to interpret that debate. Right? The Gemara suggested perhaps the debate was dependent on 2 migus or 1 migu, and the other position is that it even depends on 1 migu. Without getting into too much detail, we'll get back to it as needed. Okay, so Nachman Rav Chisda say that this disagrees with Roman bar Kamma. They say you pick up a lost object on behalf of somebody else, he does not acquire it. My time, what's the reason? Typically speaking, if the item is ownerless and it's a good thing for a person to have, then your friend would acquire it. So why is this different? So Gemara says, "Have a teifus b'chayv makom shechav la'cherem, but teifus b'chayv makom shechav la'cherem loikana." The problem here is that there is a party here that loses out. The party that loses out here is the person who lost the item. So therefore, because it's chav loy, while it is a benefit to the guy who you're trying to get it for, to the loser, it's a loss. And therefore, the general principle of zachin that you can acquire something on behalf of somebody else does not apply where we are by acquiring it on behalf of somebody else, you cause somebody else a loss. So Rav sister of Nachman, Metzias Poel la'atzmai. If a worker finds a lost object, he gets to keep it. So you think you hire a worker, let's say, what type of worker is it? You hired a guy with a plow, right? You told him plow the field. So he's hired to plow. So if while he's plowing the field, he knocks into a treasure chest or something, then he gets to keep it.
But it's your property, right?
Why
is he going to keep it? It was on
public property. It was on public property. It was next to your property. It wasn't public. Okay. Let's say you hired him. inclusive. So you didn't hire him to plow the field. You hire him to work for you, to do anything that he wants. And fine, so you gave him one job and you gave him a different task, and then along the way, he finds the lost wallet. Right? So then what happens? The wallet belongs to the owner. Now, hold on a second. Again, if there's a stranger, two strangers, one guy picks it up for the other guy. They say that if they pick up if the item in question is a lost wallet, then they do not acquire it. You can pick it up for yourself, you can't pick it up for your friends. But now when you hire a worker, and the worker picks up the lost wallet, you do get to keep it. What's the difference?
Yeah, really.
Well, that's since he's a working fee on your own property.
He was working in public, he was
works in the
acting as a
public-
courier,
Oh.
let's say.
It's kind of-
Well, it was his fifth task of the day, the first four tasks. He's hired on inclusive labor, so he's hired for everything. Okay, so the question is, why is a worker different than why is a friend can't pick it up for a friend? Because the loser of the item is taking a loss by you acquiring it. But your worker could acquire it on your behalf. What's the difference? He says to him, Shiny Pearl, the other bias. The pile, because he's working for the master, his hand is like the hand of the owner. It doesn't involve the principle of Zachan. I'm not acquiring it on your behalf. I am your behalf. Because you hired me. So the Gemara says, well, not quite, because Va'amarav, we'll learn about this later in the Masechta. There's a whole chapter about hiring workers. A worker is allowed to change his mind and withdraw from the job mid-job. This is, so what do they call this? There's a word for it, at will, right? You're employed at will. You can leave if you want, and you can leave in the middle of the day. So Amarlei. So so now the implication here is if he could change his mind in the middle of the day, then how can you say he belongs to the owner? He doesn't belong to the owner. He can just change his mind if he wants. So Amar he says, yeah, well, until he changes his mind, he represents the owner. He doesn't represent. He is the owner. He's authorized by the owner, by the employer. And the reason why he could change his mind and not decide not to work is not because he doesn't represent the owner to the fullest extent. It's because it's a different reason. The Jewish people are God's slaves. They're not slaves to slaves. Meaning that an employment is never considered a slavery. And that's why you always have the right to change your mind midday. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yechanan. Rav Chia bar Abba says the name of Rav Yechanan, Hamagbiya Metzia Chaveroi, Kona Chaveroi. If somebody picks up a lost object for his friend, he acquires it. His friend does acquire it. Yeah, 1 second. Okay. In other words, Rav Yechanan here goes with Rabbi Kamma, disagrees with Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda. Rav Yechanan says you could acquire a lost object on behalf of your friend. The entire Mishnah is saying, and what about the Mishnah? The Mishnah that you saw yesterday. The Mishnah implies that the guy on the horse sends his buddy leading the horse to go pick up the item. And the guy picks up the item and then says, by the way, I want it now. The implication of that is that even though he picked it up for the original guy, the guy riding the horse, but he didn't acquire it for the guy because it's a lost object and you cannot acquire a lost object on behalf of your friend. Now that he changes his mind and decides to keep it, he could. So Gemara says, that's not such a question on Rav Yechanan. Again, Rav Yechanan says, you could acquire for your friend. In that case, if you could acquire it for your friend, then how can you change your mind and say, oh, you know what, I really want to keep it for myself? So the Gemara says, the guy on the horse said to him, pick up the item and give it to me. Meaning that I'll acquire it when you give it to me. It says, so even though he picks it up, he never acquires it for the guy because the guy never told him to acquire it. Until he actually hands it over to the guy, he can always change his mind and decide to keep it for himself. However, had the guy on the horse said to him, that I want you to acquire it on my behalf, then according to Rabbi Yochanan, he would the guy leading the horse would have acquired the item because of bavametzia chaver kana chaver, and he would not be able to change his mind. Okay.
Like one could pick it up from who ended up with the.
So the guy riding the horse, the guy leading the horse, picked it up for the guy riding the horse. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, the guy riding the horse did not say zocha, acquire it. If he did, then he would not be able to change his mind. However, because he said no, give it to me, so what he meant to say is pick it up and give it to me, and I'll acquire it on my own when you give it to me. And therefore, until it was actually given to him, the guy leading the horse could always change his mind.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a very interesting Mishnah. Rosa Metzia. He sees a lost object. V'nafal himeno. He decides to fall on it. He thinks that falling on the item makes it his. But somebody else went and took it out from underneath him and grabbed it and picked it up. The guy who picks it up, he acquires it.
Is it a little like Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football?
Not feeling anything.
Not necessarily. She can pick up the ball.
Okay. Amr Shlakish Mishum Abakayan Bardal. So Shlakish quotes Abakayan Bardal. Very interesting name. Arba Amas Shal Adam Kainas Lebchol Makam. A person's 4 cubits, the space around the person, 4 amas, is acquires anything on his behalf. Meaning, if something is within your 4 amas, you acquire it. And we'll have to discuss this more at length, how exactly this works and why. Okay, let's begin with why. My time, what's the reason? The rabbis created this rabbinical type of kinyan so that people shouldn't fight. Meaning that you're in like a public park and you're doing business. So you can, instead of having to actually lift the item up or have to pull it, as long as it's within your 4 amas, you can acquire it that way. And the reason why I say public park is because you have public park, you have permission to congregate and lobby. You just sit around and do nothing there. That's what it's for. Okay, so Amar Abaya says, Ma'aseh Rav Chiya bar Yosef Peah. Rav Chiya bar Yosef had a question from the mission in Peah, and Amar Rava Ma'aseh Rav Yaakov bar Yidi Nezaken. Rav Yaakov bar Yidi had a question from the Zikin. So let's explain. Amar Abaya Ma'aseh Rav Chiya bar Yosef Peah. The question from the mission in Peah. Not al miktas Peah, v'zorak al ashar. He picked up some of the Peah, and he threw himself on the rest of it. Now, throwing yourself on top of Peah is not, you know, pears, right?
Right.
Familiar with pear?
Oh, yeah.
He threw
Okay.
it over.
Oh, okay. So he threw the cuttings over the other parts of the pear. Ele baklum, that doesn't, you don't acquire it that way. Nafale alel, let's say he fell on it, or parasalisi alai, he covered it with his blanket. And somebody else wants to take it, he could take it. It's not, you can't acquire pear by covering it with your talus. Okay. Familiar with the laws of shikha? Typically, we put shikha, leket, and peh in one category. Peh is the corner of your field, goes to the poor people.
Oh,
Leket,
like leket?
leket is when you cut,
Oh,
if
yeah.
you miss
okay.
1 or 2, what are those things? Stalks.
Okay.
Stalks, then those must be left in the field for the poor. And shikha, aymer shikha is when you forget a bundle, either 1 or 2 bundles. 3 bundles, you go back. Okay, so same thing is true with shikha. So if he covers the shikha with his talus, doesn't work. If you say that 4 amas is a kinyan, then niknu le arba amas idei. As soon as he walks within 4 amas of the peah, he should acquire it because it's within his 4 amas. So Gemara says, he didn't say that he wants to acquire it with Dalet Amas. He talking Rabbanon. So the Gemara says, "We talking Rabbanon kiloi Amar my hafa." Well, who cares if he didn't say that 4 amas should acquire it? If the rabbi said 4 amas is a kinyan, then as soon as he walks within 4 amas, he should acquire it, even if he didn't say anything. So Gemara says, "Kivan the nafal," because he fell on it, or he threw his stuff on it. So this is the obvious resolution over here. this guy is clearly not trying to acquire the item with Daled Amos. Otherwise, he'd be walking up and down the field, right? What's he trying to use as a kinyan? He thinks that falling on something is a kinyan. So therefore, he's clearly stating that he doesn't want Daled Amos to be a kinyan. He wants falling on it to be a kinyan, but it's not a kinyan. So therefore, he does not acquire it. Rapapa Amar, Rapapa says, "Kitikinu leRabbanon arba ames ba'almo." The kinyan of 4 ames only works in a public property designated for lobbying and congregating. It does not work in a public property that's not designated for those things, like a road, and it's also not that it also is not applicable in a private domain. Obviously, peah is in the field of the owner, and therefore it's in a private domain, and therefore there's no kinyan of Daled Amos. The alfak of the zachle rachmana begavok, he zachle rachmana lehaluchi ba, v'lin peah hevi chatzera loy zachle rachmana. Even though the Torah says that a portion of the field is peah, that portion is a portion to be able to go and collect peah. It's not yours to be able to be a private courtyard. Meaning the poor guy can't put up a shed on the corner of the field that's peah. It's not his land. It's not what it belongs to him. He's allowed to walk in and take his peah. He can't, set up shop there. And
no squatting.
yeah, and similarly, he can't. That's where the kinyan of Daled Amos will not work. Amarov Rava says, "Meister Rav Yaakov Aridi." Rav Yaakov Aridi, the following question: Nizikin from Nizikin. Rasa Metzia v'nafal ela. Our Mishnah above Metzia is Masechtas Nizikin. He finds a lost object. He falls on it. Ubach or somebody else comes. V'hersik ba and he grabs it. Zesh hersik ba zachaba. The guy who grabs it acquires it. Okay, now we have the same question here. You fell on the item. Well, 1 second. You fell on the item, clearly was within your Daled Amos. So how could somebody take it away from you? Daled Amos or Kaino? Yeah, Eric? The Gemara says, he didn't say he wanted to acquire it with Daled Amos. The Gemara says, well, why would you have to say it? The talk about if the rabbi said it's a kinyan, why do you have to actually say it? Daled Amos is a kinyan. It is a kinyan, even if you don't say it. The Gemara says, well, no. He wanted to acquire it by falling on it, not by the kinyan of Daled Amos. Yeah.
Doesn't the kinyan of Daled Amos lead the whole world into a crazy situation, because you can walk past anything?
So first of all, explain that it doesn't apply roads. It only applies in public areas that are designated for public areas. We'll get to hold the question, because we'll get to the whatever. Let's continue. We haven't really explained the mechanism of how it works, and which we'll get to, and then the limitations of that mechanism, which is also plentiful. Okay, Rav Sheshes Amar. Rav Sheshes has different resolution. This is what I mentioned previously. It only works besimta. Simta is a part of Rishus Harabim that's designated for transactions, business, commerce, lobbying, congregating, that type of stuff. It's a place where it's a designated place for you to put down your stuff. It's not the roads. In the place, Rishus Harabim, Kadaki Rabim in a busy road, or even a sidewalk would count. Kadaki Rabim, people got to move. Let the kinyan rabbanon. The rabbis did not enact such a kinyan. So Gemara says v'hal b'chol makom. It says in every single place. So Gemara says kol makom la'asiyah tzidei Rishus Harabim. Kol makom includes the side areas of Rishus Harabim. So this is more like the benches. Those areas you're allowed to sit down on, even if they're on the sidewalk, but you can sit down there, like the bus stops. That's doesn't. So it's not just the parks, but it's also the benches. Okay. For Amr Shlagish Mishum Abakayim Bar, the Shlagish says the name of Abakayim Bar. The Lakatana Ein La Chotzer, the Ein La Arba Amas. Okay, so here's really where we start discussing more of the details. Daled Amos works very similar to the concept of Chotzer. Chotzer is your courtyards, and we're really leaning now into Chotzer. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about it tomorrow, God willing. Okay, so what's a Chotzer? If you have a courtyard and somebody puts things in your courtyard, then you acquire those things. we'll see that there's quite a few limitations. There are also two mechanisms of how this would work. One idea is that your courtyard is an extension of your hands. Just like you can do kinyanim in your hand, right? You pick something up, or alternatively, let's say I'm acquiring from you a diamond ring. I didn't even have to pick it up. As soon as you put it into my hand and close it, it's enough. You ever went to a wedding, you don't see the woman doesn't lift up her hand, the bride, right? She doesn't need to. It's on her hand. She closes her hand. That's it. It's hers. It's in her hand. It's called kinyan yad. It's in your hand. So just like you have a hand, well, you have a courtyard. It's also it's an extension of your hand, and we'll discuss more details. The other mechanism that this would work is called shlichus. Consider your courtyard to be your agent. So, in other words, just like you can acquire it, we consider this to be as if it's an agent of yours. And we'll get to the difference momentarily. Okay. Tana ein lo chotzer ve'ein lo arba amas. Rish Lakish, quoting Abakayin Bardla, says that a child does not have kinyan chotzer or dalad amas. A katana is a young girl. Now she does have some kinyanim. She can be married, and she can also be divorced. How do you divorce her? Well, you put the get in her hands because she has a kinyan yad. But let's say she owns property. How does she own property? Let's say her father died. She inherited property, right? She doesn't have to actually make a kinyan because there's no kinyan necessary for inheritance. So or her mother died, for example. That would be the same thing, same category. So she has property now. You put the get in her property, divorce, not valid. Ein lo chotzer. She does not have kinyan chotzer. Even though she owns the property, it has a gate on it. You throw it has a mailbox. You put the get in the mailbox. Does not work. Also, if she's walking on the street and you throw the divorce into her 4 amas, it does not work. For a regular woman, it would work, by the way. She was sitting down in a public area and you had someone drop a divorce, right next to her, that would be fine. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name for Rabbi Yesh lachotzer v'yesh la'arba amas. He disagrees. He says there is a kinyan chotzer and a kinyan of dalad amas. What's the debate here? Marasavar, one opinion says chotzer mishum yoda is rabbi kiyechad isla yad chotzer nami isla. Rabbi Yochanan says that it's kinyan chotzer, right? What does kinyan chotzer mean? I'm sorry, chotzer is mishum yad. Her courtyard is like her hand. And therefore, just like she has a hand, in other words, she can acquire a divorce in her hands. So therefore, she has kinyan chotzer as well. Umar savar chotzer mishum shlichus is rabbi v'chihechad shlichus leslay chotzer nami lesla. She cannot appoint an agent because she's not an adult yet. So therefore, her courtyard cannot act as her agent either. She's not mature enough. So Gemara says, is there even a possibility that a courtyard is considered an agent? But Tanya, we learned the yodai. You put the divorce in her hand. One second. No. Okay, this is referring to a watchman, right? So you gave your item to the watchman, and you let's say he was an unpaid watchman, and he claims it was stolen, and he actually is the thief. We find out he biyadai. We find it in his hand, right? Well, do you think the item was actually? Does it have to be actually in his hands? Meaning, let's say you gave him a diamond to watch, and turns out he's holding the diamond in his hand. He claims it was stolen. Turns out the diamond's in his hand. Okay, he's a thief. What happens if you find it in his courtyard, on his roof, in his shed? His courtyard, his roof, his shed, minayin. How do you know that's included? These examples, by the way, are places where he might typically hide it, because you might check his house. So he'll hide it in his attic, he'll hide it in his shed, he'll put it in his courtyard. Meaning you'll find the item by him in any place that you'll find it by him. Clearly, that means that the courtyard is just like his hand. Major problem here. If you say the courtyard acts as his agent, well, then the courtyard here is an agent for sin. The courtyard is his agent to steal. And we know that you can't appoint an agent to steal. You're laughing. We'll get to your laughter in a moment. That's a legitimate laugh. The Gemara will give that as a resolution. Okay, so you have a few different reasons. Try to listen closely to what the difference is here. Ravina. Ravina says, no. When do we say ein shliach bar avera? Hecha de shliach bar chiyuvahu. When the agent has his own personal liability, right? Meaning, if I appoint an agent that has personal liability, then the agent has the culpability for the action, right? So I send a different adult to steal. The adult himself is capable, and therefore he takes the blame for the stealing. However, if the agent is my courtyard who isn't on its own culpable, so therefore I'm culpable in its stead. Okay. A courtyard doesn't have its own culpability. So then the messenger who sends is liable. If that's the case, let's say a guy tells a woman or a slave, go steal from me. Now the Mishnah says that if a woman and a slave steal, I'm going to do the spoiler alert here. I'll spoil it for you. Okay. The Mishnah says if a woman and a slave steal, then they are exempt from liability. Now, the truth of the matter here really is that they're not really exempt. They just don't have money to pay. The Gemara says if the slave is freed or the woman's divorced, then now they do have their own money, then they do have to pay. Or if the woman's married and for whatever reason the husband and the wife do not share finances, then the woman would be liable as well. So, and that's really the Gemara's resolution here. The question is, look, they don't have to pay, and the answer is, well, they really do have to pay. They just don't have the money to pay. Those are two very different things. Okay. They don't have to pay, so maybe the guy who sends them to do damage should have to pay because there's no culpability. So Gemara says, no. They do have to pay. They just don't have any money to pay. It's not if the woman was divorced or the slave was freed, then they have to pay. Meaning, these are examples of people that are culpable, they just might not have the money to pay.
Right.
Therefore, obviously, you can't send them as messengers. Rav Sama says, when do we invoke the rule of ein shliach bar avera? It's when the messenger has a choice. He could choose to do it, to listen to you, or he could choose not to do it. However, but a courtyard, a courtyard has no choice in the matter. It's probably what you were thinking when you left. No?
No, I don't remember.
It's sort of very difficult to argue that you can't serve as an agent when the courtyard doesn't have any agency of his own. When you have agency, then we say that the agent himself is culpable. But when the courtyard has no agency, it acts as an agent, but it has no agency. So therefore, Mechayev Sholcha, the guy who sends it, the guy who owns the courtyard, is able to acquire the item. And therefore, the courtyard could help him steal if he's a watchman. Right? Going back to the watchman scenario, the guy claims it was stolen, but really his courtyard is stealing it because the item is in his courtyard, which is fine because his courtyard has no agency. So if his courtyard steals it for him, that's considered him stealing it. He takes the culpability of the courtyard. Okay, my benai. What's the difference of opinion? Okay, so again, let's try to knock this together. So we have two reasons. Number one is the messenger has to have his own agency, or the messenger has to be liable has their own culpability. So let's explain. A kohen tells a Jewish man, "I'd like you to serve as my agent to send kedushin to a woman who's forbidden to me, a divorcee." The Yisrael is not prohibited to marry a divorcee. The kohen is. Is the Yisrael liable? Yisrael does have agency, but he has no culpability. Got it? Another possibility. So there's a Torah prohibition to shave the payas. That's the area, sort of behind the forehead, above the ear bone and the line of the skull by the ear and forward of the top of the ear, roughly speaking. That's what we call the paya. That area cannot be shaved. Now, very interestingly, not so surprisingly, a woman does not have the prohibition to shave. Not herself and not a man either. Because a woman doesn't grow a beard, so she's allowed to shave the area of the paya. And she's also allowed to shave. She's also not prohibited to shave a man. Now, interestingly enough, a man is prohibited to shave the pay of a child, even though the child himself is exempt, obviously. But a man is forbidden to shave the pay of a child. Generally speaking, by the way, the one who shaves and if you have a compliant individual who's being shaved, who's willingly participating, they're both liable. Obviously, the child would have no liability if somebody was shaving his pay. He wouldn't know the difference, or even if he would, he's below the age of agency, of maturity. So what happens? Let's say a person says to a woman to shave a child's payas. He appoints her as a messenger. So if the reason is culpability, the woman has no culpability, and the man who sends her would be liable for shaving the child. But if the reason is agency, the woman does have agency, and therefore the man who sends her would not be liable.
Sounds like really close shave.
You know, I mean, ish the amr isha ak for the cotton. Haklish and the amr kolechadi by avedi by loyavid lo mechayev shalchay hachanami by avedi by loyavid. In either the case of the woman shaving or the case of the Yisrael giving kedushin on behalf of the kohen to a divorcee, well, they both, in the case with regard to agency, they both have agency. They both could choose to do it or could choose not to do it. Therefore, the guy who sends them would not be liable. If the reason is because the messenger has his own culpability, because they are not culpable for this action, so therefore the guy who sends them would be liable. Okay. Is there even a possibility that chotzer is not because of yad? Meaning the acquisition of chotzer is as an agent, not as an extension of your hand. We'll see. Vatanya, we learned yada. You have to give the divorce into her hand. Meaning, giving to a courtyard is the same as giving to her hand. Clearly, the Torah is indicating to us that a courtyard is a hand. It puts them in the same category. So the Gemara says, you're right. Everyone agrees that with regard to divorce, the way divorce in a courtyard works is because the courtyard is an extension of the woman's hands. The question is, with regard to a lost object, or with regard to anything else, really. Marasavar, one opinion says, Yafina Metzia Meget. We compare Metzia, we compare business transactions in a courtyard to the transaction of a divorce. And therefore, they're both under the rubric of yad. The courtyard is considered an extension of the person's hands. We do not compare them. Therefore, a courtyard for divorce is a hand, but a courtyard for business, that's an agent. Meaning, if let's say let's say we're doing a business deal. So I say, you know what? You bring your stuff, park your trailer in my courtyard, and we sign the business deal. And I give you the money, then it's mine instantly. Because my courtyard gets it for me, because it's my agent, not because it's my hand. Because we do not compare business to get. Get is a hand, business is an agent. Okay, and now we get to the fun part. Alternatively, the truth of the matter is, with regard to a young girl, everybody agrees that her courtyard is her hand. Because by a young girl, the only way for her to acquire a divorce is in her hand, and therefore we say courtyard, that's her hand, and it's her hand for business too. The question is, what happens if she's not a girl? She's a male child, a boy. Some say we learn that a boy is learned from a girl, just like a girl has kinyan chotzer, a boy also has kinyan chotzer. And the other opinion says, no, we don't compare the two. There isn't really a debate. Meaning, the opinion that says that chotzer is a hand, that opinion is referring to a child. And the opinion that says chotzer is an agent, that's referring to an adult. Once we do not compare the laws of get to the laws of business, and under the laws of business, a chotzer, a courtyard, is an agent. Under the laws of divorce, a courtyard is a hand. Okay, let's begin the Mishnah. Continue on the subject of courtyard. Okay, so there's a lost object. We'll soon see the lost object was in private property. There was a deer, but he had a broken leg. So he was sort of immobile, couldn't really move much. Okay, or they were baby birds that couldn't yet fly. And the guy, so I see Jules chasing after these things to get them, and guess what? They're in my field. So I say, Zachsali Sadai, I might want my field to acquire these items. The law is Zachsalai. The acquisition works. My field acquires these items. Let's see, you have a regular deer running, or the birds were flying, and then I said, my field should acquire these things. It does not work. Why not? We'll explain, we'll soon see that the field presumably does not have a fence. And therefore a deer can get out just as easily as he can get in. And the same is true certainly of birds, right? Even if there was a fence. And therefore it's a chotzer she'eina mishtameres. Now, if I'm present, the field is not watched. Nobody's watching the field. The field doesn't have a lock, doesn't have a fence on it. As easy as these things come in, they can get out. And this is true also of a deer that's basically limp. He can also walk out, except that he has a difficult time walking out. And if I'm next to my field, now my field is watched, and I can acquire it with my field. Okay, let's continue for another minute. He must be standing next to his field. The tikni lesadeo, and then his field acquires. The Amar of Yosef Chanina, a person's courtyard acquires items without his knowledge. However, this is only true of a courtyard that has a fence and it's watched. But if the field is not watched, if I'm standing next to the field, so now I'm watching it then it's a valid kinyan. But if I'm not standing next to the field, then the kinyan is not valid. Okay. And this discussion of chatzim shemaris, chatzim shemaris is we'll kick off tomorrow. Sorry, tomorrow is early. Yes, what is that time? 5 to 5? 5 to 5. Nice and early.